My sister-in-law Brenda was 5 months pregnant, but the bigger her belly got, the thinner the rest of her became. Everyone in my family called it a miracle. They said she was carrying a big, healthy boy. I knew better. One night, I saw a pale, slimy head push out from under her nightgown, then another inch of white body, then another. It wasn't a baby making her stomach move. It was a tapeworm. In my last life, I screamed. I dragged Brenda to the ER, where doctors pulled a worm nearly 3 feet long from her body. She lost the baby, and somehow that became my fault. My parents said I'd killed their grandson. My brother Kevin and Brenda said I'd cursed their son into a worm. Then they held me down and tried to force the parasite into my mouth. By the time the smaller worms hatched and began tearing through me from the inside, I was locked in my room begging for help. No one opened the door. I died listening to them tell me I deserved it. So when I opened my eyes and found myself back on the exact same night, staring at that same white worm wriggling out from under Brenda's nightgown, I didn't scream. I smiled. Then I quietly closed the bedroom door. If they wanted their precious son that badly, who was I to interfere? I had barely turned around when I saw Mom standing in the living room. For one terrible second, I thought she'd seen the worm too. "What are you doing up?" she snapped. "Why aren't you asleep instead of creeping around like a thief?" I forced my face into a harmless smile. Kevin's door was open. I didn't want Brenda or the baby getting cold, so I closed it. Mom's expression softened by half an inch. "Good. At least you're useful for something." She went back to her room. Only then did I breathe again. I returned to my tiny bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, my hands still trembling. Brenda had always loved sushi. Pregnancy only made it worse. She could finish an entire platter of raw seafood by herself and still complain she was hungry. At first, everyone praised her appetite, but the more she ate, the stranger she looked. Her cheeks hollowed out, her wrists became thin, and her collarbones stuck out sharply. Only her stomach kept growing. In my last life, I had been stupid enough to care. "Brenda," I'd said carefully, "maybe you should get checked. Losing this much weight while your stomach keeps growing doesn't seem normal." She exploded. "So now you're jealous because I'm carrying a healthy boy?" Mom immediately joined in. "Why do you always have to say unlucky things? Brenda is pregnant. Stop cursing my grandson." Then she demanded $50 from me so Brenda could order more sushi. A few nights later, I saw the worm. I panicked, rushed Brenda to the hospital, and thought I'd saved her life. Instead, I destroyed mine. The doctors removed the parasite, but Brenda miscarried. Kevin screamed that my big mouth had turned his son into a worm. Dad called me a murderer. Mom held the parasite in front of my face and shouted, "You killed my grandson, so you can eat him." I remembered fighting until my throat went raw. I remembered the worms inside me. I remembered begging them to call an ambulance. They locked my bedroom door. By morning, I was dead. I lay back on my pillow and stared at the ceiling. Not this time. This time, Brenda could keep her miracle. The next morning, Brenda was already at the table with a mountain of sushi in front of her. She was only 5 months pregnant, but her stomach looked almost full term. Her face was pale and narrow, her arms no thicker than sticks. Still, she ate like she'd been starved. Piece after piece disappeared into her mouth. Raw fish, octopus, shrimp. The sight of it nearly made me gag. Brenda noticed me watching. "What?" she snapped. "Jealous because my baby has a good appetite?" Before I could answer, Mom rushed out of the kitchen. "Don't you dare upset her." Her palm cracked across my cheek. "You want something to happen to my grandson? Get on your knees and apologize." Dad looked disgusted with me. Kevin stared like he wanted to throw me out of the house. Brenda rested both hands over her huge belly and watched smugly. In my last life, I would have tried to defend myself. This time I smiled. "You're all misunderstanding me. I think Brenda looks great. I used to worry too much, but I get it now. Sushi is nutritious. Brenda's eating well and the baby is obviously growing fast." Brenda's chin lifted. "Exactly." I looked at the empty platter. "Honestly, it smells so good I almost want some myself." Her smile disappeared. She pulled the plate toward her. "There's barely enough for my baby. Get your own." Mom immediately kicked my ankle. "Don't touch your nephew's food," Kevin sneered. "You don't contribute anything, and you're already trying to steal from my son? Maybe we should just marry you off and use the bride money to feed him." I nearly laughed. I was the only person in the house with a steady income. Kevin had been unemployed for months, but I didn't argue. Instead, I lowered my eyes and said, "I would never take food away from my nephew. Actually, a friend of mine just opened a sushi place. I already ordered a huge batch for Brenda." Every face in the room changed. Mom's anger vanished. Kevin's eyes lit up. Even Dad sat straighter. Brenda leaned forward eagerly. "How much?" "A lot." "When are you getting it?" "Today." Mom immediately took the broom from my hand. "Then why are you still standing here? Go. I'll handle the chores." I smiled. "Of course, Mom." I spent the rest of the day collecting cheap sushi from several stores and arranging for more to be delivered. By the time I got home, it was dark. Mom opened the door already yelling, "What took you so long? Brenda's starving. Do you even care about your nephew?" Then she saw the cart behind me. Her mouth shut. Boxes were stacked from top to bottom. Brenda pushed past her. "Is all of that mine? I bought enough for everyone." For a second, nobody moved. Then Kevin ripped open the first box. Dad grabbed a piece. Brenda reached in with both hands. Mom shoved her way to the table. Within minutes, they were eating like they'd never seen food before. "This is incredible," Kevin mumbled through a full mouth. "No wonder my son loves this stuff." Brenda laughed and rubbed her stomach. "He has expensive taste." Mom pointed at the remaining boxes. "Joy, don't just stand there. Open the rest." I obeyed. Box after box went onto the table. I didn't touch a single piece. Eventually, Mom noticed. "Why aren't you eating?" I gave her the sweetest smile I could manage. "There's only so much. The best food should go to my parents, my brother, Brenda, and the baby." Mom looked pleased. "At least you finally learned some sense." Then she went back to eating. I watched them wipe soy sauce and fish oil from their mouths. I knew what was hidden inside that bargain sushi. Tiny things no one at the table bothered looking for. I lowered my gaze so they wouldn't see me smile. "Eat, please. Eat as much as you want. After all, this family loved sons more than anything. Maybe this time everyone could have one." From that day on, sushi became a regular meal in our house. Brenda's appetite doubled, then doubled again. Her stomach became enormous, but her face looked almost skeletal. She was thrilled. "My baby is going to be huge," she bragged one afternoon, rubbing the moving bulge beneath her dress. I felt him kicking all night. I stared at the shifting shape under her skin. That wasn't kicking. And she wasn't the only one changing. Kevin's stomach started swelling, then Dad's. Even Mom developed a round, hard belly beneath her clothes. They blamed it on overeating. I encouraged them. Of course you're gaining weight. You've all been eating so well lately. Kevin laughed and patted his stomach. Dad started loosening his belt after every meal. Mom, however, kept getting bigger. One afternoon, I stared at her belly and widened my eyes. Mom, are you pregnant? The entire room went silent. Mom touched her stomach. What? I gasped dramatically. Look at you. What if I'm finally getting a little brother? Her face transformed. A boy? Dad stared at her belly, then straightened proudly. At my age? Mom laughed until her eyes watered. We're having another son. For the first time in weeks, Brenda stopped smiling. Kevin's face went stiff. They had always assumed everything Mom and Dad owned would eventually belong to Kevin. If another son appeared, that meant another heir. Suddenly, Brenda's pregnancy wasn't the only miracle in the house, and she hated it. The fight started almost immediately. Mom, who used to serve Brenda first at every meal, began watching how much sushi she took. Leave some for me. I have a baby to feed too. Brenda slammed her chopsticks down. You're not pregnant. You're just fat. Mom nearly flipped the table. Kevin jumped in to defend Brenda. Dad defended Mom. Within days, the house turned into a battlefield. Every meal ended in screaming. Every swollen stomach became a competition. Every strange movement beneath their skin was proudly described as a kick. Whenever they needed someone to blame, they still blamed me. I didn't care. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled when they insulted me. Every night, I listened from my room as they argued over whose son would be stronger, healthier, and more important. Brenda was getting close. I could tell by the way her stomach moved now. Sometimes the skin rippled from one side to the other. Sometimes several separate bumps pushed outward at once. She still stroked them lovingly. My baby can't wait to come out. Neither could I. Because in my last life, I had ruined everything by saving her. This time, I was going to let nature take its course. And when Brenda finally gave birth, the whole family would get to meet the sons they'd been praying for.
The tension in the house reached a fever pitch over the next 2 weeks. No one was cooking anymore. They lived strictly on the cheap, uninspected seafood I brought home daily. I used my entire paycheck to fund their addiction, quietly moving my personal savings into a brand new private bank account they knew nothing about. Mom's stomach had expanded into a hard, unnatural sphere that stretched her thin floral shirts to their breaking point. Dad couldn't button his pants, and Kevin, who used to brag about his build, looked like a starving man who had swallowed a basketball. One evening, we were sitting in the living room when Brenda suddenly let out a high-pitched shriek. "Kevin, look," she gasped, clutching her massive abdomen. Under the thin fabric of her dress, something long and distinct slithered beneath her skin, dragging itself from her ribs down to her pelvis. It wasn't the quick, blunt hit of a baby's foot. It was a fluid, squirming wave. "He's rolling." Kevin cheered, running his hands over her stomach. "Look at him, my son is going to be an athlete." Mom sneered from the armchair, rubbing her own bulging middle. "Don't get too excited. Mine moved twice as much this morning. He's pushing upward, ready to take over." "Up, Mom," Brenda snapped, her hollow, gaunt eyes flashing with venom. "Your baby is just fat. Mine is the real heir, Joy, tell her." "Tell her my baby is the biggest." I paused from wiping down the coffee table, offering a serene, obedient smile. "Brenda is right, Mom. Brenda's belly is so active, but Mom, yours is so round and firm. It really feels like there's more than one in there." "Than one?" Dad's eyes lit up with disgusting pride. "Twins, 2 more boys. You're all crazy," Brenda shrieked, clutching her stomach as a violent spasm hit her. She doubled over, panting heavily. Her skin had turned a translucent, sickly grey, sweat dripping down her skeletal jaw. "It hurts. Kevin, it hurts so bad. It's just labour approaching," Kevin scoffed, not even bothering to look up from his phone. "Stop being so dramatic. My mom birthed 2 kids and didn't whine like this." I watched as Brenda writhed on the couch, multiple distinct wriggling masses pressing against her skin simultaneously. Not labour, I thought, hiding my grin behind a dish towel. "They're just running out of room." It happened at 2 a.m. on a stifling Saturday night. A blood-curdling scream shattered the silence of the house. It wasn't just Brenda this time. It was a chorus of agony. I sat up in bed, fully dressed, and waited 3 precise minutes before walking out into the hallway. The living room was a scene straight out of a nightmare. Brenda was writhing on the rug, her hands clawing at her stomach so hard she was drawing blood. Kevin was on his knees next to her, but he wasn't helping. He was clutching his own abdomen, sobbing loudly as his stomach bucked and heaved violently. Dad was collapsed in his recliner, gasping for air, while Mom was lying on her side on the couch, vomiting a foul, yellowish bile onto the cushions. "Joy," Mom wheezed, her voice thin and raspy as she caught sight of me standing calmly by the doorway. "Joy, call the doctor, the Barbies." "The Barbies are kicking too hard. They're ripping me open," Brenda screamed, thrashing wildly. "Kevin, do something, it feels like they're chewing." Kevin dragged himself toward me, reaching out a trembling, sweaty hand. "Joy, help, get the car." I didn't move. I leaned casually against the doorframe and crossed my arms. Dad bellowed from the chair, though his voice cracked into a painful whimper halfway through. "Are you deaf? Help your family." "Call an ambulance." "I don't think I should," I said softly, my voice as smooth as glass. Mom paused her vomiting, staring at me with bloodshot, confused eyes. What did you say?" I said no, I replied, stepping closer, careful to stay just out of reach. "In my last life I called the doctor. I took Brenda to the ER. Do you remember what happened?" Brenda whimpered, thrashing as a visible bump shifted rapidly under her ribcage. "What are you talking about?" "You crazy bitch, help me. You dragged me down," I continued, my voice deadpan and icy. "You forced a parasite into my mouth. You locked me in my room and let me get eaten from the inside out while you all stood outside the door and told me I deserved it." Kevin's eyes widened with horror, though he clearly thought I had lost my mind. You're insane. What life? Call a doctor." "No," I smiled brightly. You all wanted your precious boys so badly, you fought over them. You abused me for them. It would be rude of me to interrupt your family reunion. Brenda let out a sound that didn't sound human, her nightgown tore as she clawed at herself. The skin of her lower belly was stretched so thin it was practically clear. Suddenly, with a sickening wet snap, the skin yielded. She didn't bleed much, she was too malnourished. Instead, a pale, glistening head pushed through the rupture, followed by inches of thick, writhing white flesh. Kevin let out a high-pitched, pathetic shriek and tried to crawl backward, but a sudden violent spasm in his own stomach dropped him to the floor. He began to heap forward, gagging uncontrollably as a pale, slimy tail began to force its way up his esophagus. "Kevin," Mom screamed, but her own abdomen convulsed. I watched in silent fascination as the nightmare unfolded. Brenda's baby wasn't a single entity anymore. It was a massive, tangled mass of fully grown tapeworms and dozens of smaller, freshly hatched parasites that had multiplied in the damp, decaying environment of her ruined intestines. They spilled out onto the living room rug, slithering, pale and hungry. "Them off me," Dad cried, weeping like a child as several small worms squirmed out from under his unbuttoned waistband, wriggling across his chest. "Joy, please, I'm your father. A father who watched me die," I reminded him quietly. A father who called me a murderer while Mom held a worm to my face. Mom was choking now, clawing at her own neck as parasites began forcing their way out of her throat, seeking air. She looked at me with eyes full of pure, unadulterated terror, begging for a mercy she had never once shown me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. Brenda raised a bloody, trembling hand toward me from the floor, surrounded by a writhing nest of white bodies. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I unlocked my phone, hit the record button and held it up, capturing every single angle of the living room. For 10 full minutes I recorded everything. I captured Brenda's tearful realization that her miracle boy was a mass of grotesque flesh-eaters. I recorded Kevin choking on the very parasites he had forced down my throat in another timeline. I recorded my mother and father writhing in their own filth, trapped by the greed and ignorance that had ruled their lives. When the screaming finally faded into weak, wet gurgles, I stopped recording. I walked calmly to the front door, stepped outside into the cool night air and locked the deadbolt from the outside. Then I took out a second phone, a burner I had bought 3 days prior, and dialed emergency services. "Hello, 911. I forced my voice into a high, frantic sob, the kind of terrified panic I had genuinely felt in my past life. "Please, you have to help my family. I just came home from my night shift and there's blood everywhere. They're not breathing, I think something is wrong with them." I gave them the address, hung up and tossed the burner phone into a storm drain down the street. Then I sat on the curb under the streetlight, drew my knees to my chest and waited. Within 7 minutes the red and blue lights of police cars and ambulances illuminated the quiet neighborhood. Sirens blared, shattering the calm of the night. An officer rushed up to me as I sat trembling on the curb. "Miss, are you okay? Is this your house?" My family," I stammered, tearlessly sobbing into my hands. "They wouldn't let me in," I heard screaming. The paramedics smashed through the front door. The horror that followed was beyond anything the local precinct had ever seen. The hazmat teams were called in within 20 minutes. The entire street was blocked off. Neighbors gathered behind yellow police tape, whispering in hushed, terrified tones as bodies covered in biohazard tarps were wheeled out of my home. I was taken to the hospital for observation, playing the part of the traumatized, innocent daughter to perfection. The medical examiner's report was leaked to the press 2 days later, creating a media frenzy. The cause of death was severe, acute parasitic infection caused by the consumption of rotting, mass-contaminated raw fish. The parasites had multiplied so aggressively in their malnourished hosts that they caused internal ruptures and systemic organ failure. Because I had maintained a separate diet and had records showing I worked late shifts, I was completely cleared of any wrongdoing. In fact, the police treated me as a grieving survivor. While still in the hospital room, a detective sat beside my bed, looking at me with deep sympathy. "Miss Joy," he said gently, "we searched the house. We found receipts for massive amounts of raw seafood purchased over the last month. Why were they eating so much?" I wiped a fake tear from my cheek. "Brenda. She was obsessed. She thought it was good for her baby, my parents and brother. They just believed everything she said. I tried to buy them fresh food, but they screamed at me if I didn't bring home the sushi they wanted. I was so scared of them." The detective sighed, shaking his head. "It's a tragic case of ignorance and severe neglect. You're lucky you didn't eat it, Joy." "I know," I whispered, looking out the window. "I'm very lucky." A month later, the dust finally settled. As the sole surviving heir, everything my parents owned fell to me: the house, their bank accounts, and their life insurance policies. I sold the house to a commercial developer who planned to tear it down, erasing every physical trace of the horror that had taken place inside those walls. I stood in front of the empty lot on a clear, sunny afternoon. The bulldozers had just finished leveling the structure, leaving behind nothing but flat, dark dirt. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a notification from my bank. The payout from the life insurance and the sale of the property had just cleared. I was officially a millionaire. I took the small USB drive out of my pocket, the one containing the video I had taken that night. The video of them begging, choking, and finally facing the consequences of their cruel, horrific actions. I walked over to a small trash fire the construction crew had set to burn scrap wood and dropped the drive into the flames. I watched it melt into a useless blob of black plastic. In my last life, I died cold, scared, and alone in a dark room, betrayed by the people who were supposed to love me. In this life, I was free, wealthy, and alive. I turned my back on the empty lot, stepped into my brand new car, and drove away without ever looking back.